welcome our guests. We have some special guests today. Pavitra, thank you for joining us. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a delight. And David Stover, it's always good to see you too. Welcome again. And we also have David Moore with us. Welcome. And Mike, as I mentioned, you'll be getting an appropriate introduction momentarily. We're happy to see you as well. So on with the show.
Whoa, wait a minute. Aren't you forgetting Frank? Hey.
Oh my goodness. Frank, I think of you as part of the family. I'm so sorry. I did absolutely not mean to neglect you. Frank Smith, Diane Good's husband, is with us today. It's always great to see you, Frank. Diane, thank you for catching my error, my omission. So again, welcome. It's lovely to have you all with us. And we will be holding our next club assembly on Thursday, June 24th at 12:30. We're going to make it a special 1 hour and 15-minute meeting because it is all that very day is also our club's 92nd birthday. And our club historian, Ron Leister, made me aware of that. So we'll have, we'll toast our club's birthday, and the strategic planning committee, which has worked hard and done an excellent job, will have a presentation to share. So I hope you can all be here, and we'll talk about that more. Also, we're going to be holding a foundation challenge for our club's foundation. We're planning to close out this Rotary year and celebrate our 92nd birthday with a special foundation donation challenge. Our club members are encouraged to make a special year-end contribution to the foundation by June 30th, and the club will match these donations on a 2-to-1 basis. And then the combined funds will be divided among 2 causes that our members can vote on in the club assembly. We'll have a poll and we'll award the funds to the top 2 ranked causes. So you want to be there so you can vote for sure. And again, we'll talk about that further. This coming weekend, both Saturday and Sunday, is another Camp Pendleton collection weekend. And as I mentioned before, these are the key contact people, the addresses for the collection sites. In the case of the Santa Clarita Valley, a phone number for location information. And if anybody is interested, I'd be happy to send you a copy of the slide so you have ready access to the person whose location is most convenient for you. So Sunday, June 6th will be the last day for collections. As I've said before, Camp Pendleton is home to 70,000 Marines and 10,000 children under the age of 5. There's 160 babies born each month. So these people who have dedicated themselves to serving our country need our help. And I encourage you, if at all possible, to participate. And this coming Saturday is the District Club Leadership Assembly. And oh, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting myself because I see that I have a text from Mark Rogo, who's probably one of those people who is waiting to get in. I'm finding, at least in my system, an occasional glitch with, here's Steve Scherer again. So we may give him a chance after all. Occasional glitch with alerts about people in the waiting room. Sometimes I get them, sometimes I don't. So we'll have several people joining us shortly. So I encourage club officers, which include the Avenue of Service chairs, and really anybody who's interested in participating this weekend. You have to register for individual sessions. So you don't have to sign up with the expectation that you'll be there all day. It will start at 8:30. It's expected to go to 3:30. We need at least one more person to take the grant training. Diane, I think you said you were going to attend for that part, if I recall. And I hope so. And I guess Steve Scherer is having some trouble getting admitted. I keep admitting him and then he comes back. And it would be great to even have several people just in case. We have to have 2 people certified for grants in order for us to qualify for a district grant this year. So we want to be able to take advantage of that funding. So
Nancy, I'm doing the training on Saturday.
great. I may see you. And
Nancy,
yes,
would you repeat that again? Or you have to have 2 what?
we have to have 2 members who are certified for grants. What they call an MOU is a memorandum of understanding.
Oh, I see.
So Mark has taken the training and we absolutely need at least one more. I think it's a good idea to have several people just in case.
Yeah.
So-
Can you send me the link that I can sign up for it?
Sure. We'll be happy to. And I see we have Steve Scherer now. Steve, would you like to give us the thought for the day?
Indeed, I would. I'm sorry to be tardy here. Technical
That's all right.
glitches, I guess.
You're
I
here.
don't know.
You're here now.
So if you pass by the north facade of Paulist Pavilion, you'll see a larger than life bronze of Coach John Wooden. And that bronze was donated to UCLA by past President Jim Collins and his wife, Carol.
Oh,
They were longtime friends of the coach. And on at the foot of that bronze, it gives the formula for success. And it says, success is peace that comes from the self-satisfaction of knowing you made the effort to be the best of what you are capable. And of course, Coach Wooden's advice goes well beyond athletics. It applies to being a parent, a spouse, a friend, and even a Rotarian. And of course, the ultimate wisdom is that success is within each of us. Amen.
amen.
Nice.
That's a really interesting story. I didn't know either about the statue or that the Collins had funded it. That's a wonderful piece of information.
Nancy, I pass by there at 7:15 every morning, jogging by there, and Coach Wooden is there exhorting me on to be the best of which I am capable.
That's wonderful. That's a great story. Thank you, Steve. I'm glad you were able to join us. We would have missed you. And for those who have lost track of time, the Rotary Virtual Convention is coming up starting on June 10th, running through June 16th. So hopefully a good number of us will participate. The website has an extensive list of speakers and programs. It's much too extensive to include in a slideshow, but it's certainly easy to go to the site, check it out, and register. So again, I encourage you very much to do so. It will be interesting to see how long it is before we get to go someplace again. All right. And Dwight, I understand you have volunteered to write today's commentary. Thank you very much. We do appreciate that. And with no further ado, I would like to bring Tom Barron back on to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Nancy. Today, we will hear from Mike Sullivan, the president of Paulist Productions. By the way, Mike, I presume you know that the songmeister today, Take Me Out to the Ball Game, was in reference to your subject, the book, Baseball as a Road to God, Seeing Beyond the Game. The book was principally authored by John Sexton, who has served as the president of New York University. When I read this book, it was obvious that Sexton brought his deep love of baseball into the spiritual world of a more meaningful life. I'm sure our speaker, Mike Sullivan, saw the connection as well, so he brought the substance of the book as a documentary project to the attention of the Paulist Production Advisory Board. Mike's experience in the entertainment world serves him well as the president of Paulist Productions. He was an executive producer on the series Growing Pains for Warner Brothers and its spinoff, Just the 10 of Us. He was also the producer and co-writer of the Growing Pains movie. As an executive, Mike was the first president of the entertainment for the UPN broadcast network, helping launch hit TV series Star Trek. Mike has served on the Paulist Production Board for over 25 years and brings his executive experience as president to a number of projects underway in production. Doris Kearns Goodwin, who wrote the foreword to Sexton's book, described it as a love letter to America's most beloved sport and exploration of the deeper dimensions it reveals. Mike, would you please tell us how Sexton sees baseball as a road to God? You're on.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. So we are looking to make a documentary based on Professor Sexton's book, Baseball as a Road to God. Now, if you look at the landscape for documentaries, let's just look at pre-COVID, the top box office documentaries. You see a lot of nature documentaries. The most famous would be March of the Penguins. You see music documentaries. I think Justin Bieber and Michael Jackson are both in the top 10 grossing documentaries of all time, with basically glorified records of their concert tours. And politics figures in there. Michael Moore and Dinesh D'Souza, one from the left, one from the right. Kind of brand name figures in documentary filmmaking. But things have evolved now with Netflix and the other streaming services. You see other themes being introduced. Nature is still there. The Oscar winner this year from Netflix, My Octopus Teacher, a wonderful film if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet. True crime is there in a big way. Tiger King kind of combines the nature theme and the crime theme. And sports, The Last Dance in association with ESPN, the Michael Jordan documentary that was a huge success last year. Now, Baseball's Road to God is not a history of baseball or a deep study of religion. It's not about a particular event or a biography of a particular person. Professor Sexton's really taking a more thematic look at what a baseball fan and a religious believer may have in common. Now, you may, like one of our board members, be of the belief, when I asked them about getting their support for this project on our board, she said to me, you know, Mike, I really don't care for baseball, and I'm not sure I'm that passionate about religion either. But I think by the end of this short talk, you'll see that there's an illumination of life in what Sexton's talking about that's particularly suited to this hopeful time of year that Nancy was talking about, the beginning of summer, where baseball often takes center stage. The first theme that Sexton talks about in the book is sacred space and sacred time. That in baseball, time is different. Baseball, he says, calls us to slow down, to live slower, and to notice. An individual inning could conceivably go on forever. Baseball's not on the clock. As former Commissioner of Baseball Mark Giamatti observed, in baseball, time doesn't matter. The bases are run counterclockwise. In fact, an individual at bat could conceivably go on forever. If you saw Chris Taylor the other night, had a 14 pitch at bat against the St. Louis Cardinals and then cleared the bases with a double. Time opens up and is experienced differently in baseball than in a sport that's on the clock. We're entering the realm kind of the mythopoetic, the great film Field of Dreams dramatizes this quite beautifully, where the gods of the sport of the past, if you will, come to this little farm field, this little baseball field that Kevin Costner's character is built in the middle of Iowa. If you build it, they will come. Faith is described by Sexton in the book as the state of being ultimately concerned about something. And the fan is ultimately concerned about his team. And the experience of sacred space in baseball, of course, is the dedicated stadium. The most beautiful early examples in the 20th century would be Wrigley Field and Fenway Park, these sort of pastoral 19th century pastures in the middle of an urban landscape. And then in the 70s, we had the ugly multi-purpose stadiums. Pittsburgh had one, Cincinnati had one, Philadelphia had one. They were built for football and baseball simultaneously, and they didn't really do a great job servicing either sport. Oakland, the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum, is still with us, and it shows you the problems there. But with the building of Camden Yards in Baltimore, there was a reintroduction of this idea of the dedicated stadium. Sexton writes, for some of us, a visit to the ballpark is a move from one state of being, the more familiar one, to another. It is a transformation evoking a connection to something deep and meaningful. This is more than the simple surface observation that a stadium can be a church and the bleachers can be pews. The stadium acts as what philosopher Mircea Eliade would call a channeling of the intersection between our world and the transcendent world, a place sacred above all that connects the ordinary and the spiritual dimensions. It is not that this evocative experience occurs for everyone in every ballpark every time, but it can happen to anyone in any ballpark at any time. So you are in a separate space and you're in a remove from the hustle and bustle of daily life, and you're experiencing time differently. Since any place can create this divergence from the ordinary to the sacred, this is called hierophany in theology, a touching of the transcendent plane, where the sacred manifests itself in space, the real manifests itself. In other words, the greater reality is the spiritual reality, the ultimate reality, if you will. By its very nature and rules, baseball operates outside of ordinary time. In fact, timelessness is at its essence. It is not linear with a simple past, present, and future. It is cyclical, building and building towards certain quintessential moments. For the religious, this cyclical liturgical time is marked by ritual and ceremony. And of course, that's a big part of how baseball is experienced as well. The fan experiences faith and experiences doubt. And as Augustine wrote, the great Christian philosopher, faith and doubt are inseparable. One gives rise to the other. One can't exist without the other. And the baseball fan may experience things akin to miracles, the success of the 1969 Mets, Kirk Gibson's home run in the World Series in 1988 being examples. And it's also a world of blessings and curses. The Cubs were thought for many years to be, well, over 100 years really, to have experienced a curse, and they went from between 1908 and 108 years later, they didn't win a World's Championship. And a couple of great t-shirts showed up during that time. One of them in Wrigley Field said, hey, anyone can have a bad century. And there was another one that showed up at Yankee Stadium. There was no curse, your team just sucked for a long time. And of course, we all may remember the curse of the Bambino, which was the belief that when Babe Ruth was traded from the Boston Red Sox to the New York Yankees to help finance a Broadway show the Red Sox owner was investing in, the curse of the Bambino descended on Boston, and they couldn't win a World Series for forever. And this enmity, if you will, between Boston and New York, of course, persists to this day in baseball. Johnny Damon, the wonderful Red Sox outfielder with the long flowing hair and the graceful speed, when he became a free agent, went and was an apostate. He converted. He had the conversion experience. He became a Yankee. And this is the t-shirt that showed up then in Boston. Johnny Damon looks like Jesus, acts like Judas, throws like Mary. So the passion of the fan is certainly seen in those kind of experiences. But baseball is also an experience of blessings. And Mariano Rivera would be a good example of that. He was born into poverty, but remembered his childhood, Sexton writes, more for the many gatherings of his tight-knit family and long baseball-filled days. Tree branches, the straighter the better, Rivera said, or sticks found lying in the street served as bats. Makeshift balls were created by wrapping fishing nets with tape. Rivera's glove was fashioned from a flattened out milk carton, or sometimes part of a cardboard box. It had to fit in your back pocket, he once told a reporter, recalling how in the days before he pitched in baseball's grand coliseums, he considered that cardboard glove as beautiful as a major league glove. Shortly after Rivera's record-breaking game against the Twins, Sweeney Murdy, a local radio reporter, asked him if he had allowed himself a special moment to revel in his achievement. His long journey from quite literally sandlot poverty to superstardom. Rivera, a pious man who planned someday to be a minister, did not consider it an achievement. It's a blessing, he said, from the mercy of God. And then Sexton adds, maybe so. Baseball, of course, acquaints us with failure. If you're getting hit 3 out of 10 at bats, you're a star. If you're hitting a hit once every 4 at bats, you're average. The difference between hitting 250 and 350 over the course of an entire baseball season, 1 hit a week. Like religion, the game of baseball is founded on aspirations rarely met, Sexton writes. It generates far more failure than fulfillment. So that's part of what draws the similarities that Sexton sees in the two experiences of faith and baseball together. The power of embodying a sense of community, the sense of belonging to something larger than yourself, the fandom base. It may be in your particular city, or the fans of your team may be stretched out all over the world. And this community, again, is much like the religious experience. And there's something deeper in this mythopoetic realm that's going on. I've got a quote here from Bart Giamatti, the former commissioner of baseball who taught literature at Yale University when I was there. And he believes that baseball in its spiritual dimension is also about the hunger for home and the connection to fathers. He wrote, baseball is all about homecoming. It is a journey by theft and strength, guile and speed, out around first to the far island of second, where foes lurk in the reefs and the green sea suddenly grows deeper. Then to turn sharply, skimming the shallows, making for a shore that will show a friendly face, a color, a familiar language, and at third base to proceed, no longer by paths indirect, but straight to home. Baseball is about going home and how hard it is to get there and how driven is our need. It tells us how good home is. Its wisdom says you can go home again, but you cannot stay. The journey must always start once more, the bat, an oar over our shoulder, until there is an end to all journeying, the going home, the game of nostalgia. So apt an image for our hunger that it hurts. Now that's kind of a literary look at this experience of baseball as a road to God and to home and to fathers. But there was a story in the LA Times recently that you may have caught by a gentleman named Barry Rosen, who was one of the hostages in Iran. And I'd like to share a bit of his story with you now. The early April afternoon was perfect for baseball, sunny and cool, even with the New York ballpark nearly empty. It all felt good and familiar to Barry Rosen. The food, the sounds, the smell, the hapless Mets, Jacob deGrom looking masterful on the mound. As he took his seat, the 77-year-old felt a special joy at baseball's return after its COVID year without fans. That's because he said the game saved him, not once, but twice. 4 decades ago, Rosen was one of 52 Americans held hostage for 444 brutal days in Iran. Not long after their release in 1981, Rosen and the other hostages received a rare gift from Major League Baseball, a golden ticket, signed by then Commissioner Bowie Kuhn under the words, "In gratitude and appreciation, the brass lifetime pass entitled each hostage and a guest admittance to any regular season game in perpetuity." Baseball rescued me, us, and it continues to, Rosen said. There is something beautiful about the game. It's slow. It's open, wide open. You can watch the birds and still concentrate on what's going on. It was peace. It still is peace. Rosen grew up in Brooklyn, the youngest son of a diehard Brooklyn Dodgers fan. The boy and his father listened to games on the radio. When they grew older, they watched some on TV. When his dad, an electrician, had enough money, he took Rosen and his older brother to watch games at Ebbets Field. Those were wonderful times with my father, Rosen said. Seeing Duke Snyder play was just the golden age. He played stickball and youth baseball, entered the Peace Corps, went to Columbia University, obtained a master's degree in Iranian and Central Asian studies. In '78, he joined the State Department. By then, the revolution in Iran was in full swing. And of course, he was one of those who was captured. For more than a year, Rosen and 51 other Americans were threatened, beaten, and held in rough conditions, including in solitary confinement. They didn't know if they would live or die. At one point, an Iranian held a gun to Rosen's head and forced him to confess to being a spy. He lost 40 pounds and couldn't sleep. His only escape was baseball. For hours, he would sit and meditate about going to Ebbets Field, transporting himself back to the halcyon days of his youth. Baseball kept me sane, he said. He fantasized for hours, recreating games down to the pitch, the fans sitting next to him, and his father in the right field stands, the lunches his mother packed him. He especially enjoyed his deep for leading rifle, handling caroms off the wall in right field, and firing balls home for an out. It was the way to calm myself down and try to get into another world, and the world of my childhood, Rosen said. We were always with my father, a very endearing figure, a very wonderful man. And I just enjoyed being with him and knowing I was always safe with him. And baseball did have that sense of safety for me. It was something I loved as a little boy, and I've never grown out of it. One day, perhaps 4 months into confinement, he was given 20 minutes by himself in a small courtyard. He hadn't seen the sun since November 4th. The courtyard had a small patch of grass. It was so perfectly green, just like the outfield at Ebbets, an image he held on to for the rest of his captivity. How many times do you get the opportunity to escape from prison in your mind? And that grass did it, he said. I needed those 20 minutes very, very much. It helped me get through the next year. I would think back to that grass and baseball. So I think that's a beautiful evocation of the theme that Sexton is pursuing in the book, and that we will pursue in the documentary film that we're going to be making from this book. Our filmmaker, John Scheinfeld, has directed over 40 documentary films, including a film about the then still hapless Chicago Cubs and their fans. If you saw the PBS biography on American Masters of Bob Hope, he directed that film. Directed one last year about Gary Marshall, the creator of Happy Days and director of Pretty Woman. So we have a good team put together, and this isn't standard documentary film fare. Again, it's a thematic exploration of something that I think a literature major would say falls into the realm of the mythopoetic. But as Barry Rosen's story shows, there's a resonance here in that deep experience of fandom and faith that can transcend the simple realities of a game. Tom, do we have the little video to show? It's okay if we don't. Any questions or thoughts from anyone?
Yes,
John?
Yeah, I read the book myself. In fact, I read it twice. I think it's a terrific baseball book. I think it's a great book, period, but I think it's a great baseball book. And it engendered for me a lot of great memories of baseball experiences I had, one of which I can mention right now. In 1948, when I saw my first baseball game at Wrigley Field, my dad brought me to see the Brooklyn Dodgers play the Cubs, and I saw Jackie Robinson and Pee Wee Reese and Gil Hodges and the whole crowd there, and it was a terrific memory, and I still remember it all the time. That book kind of brought back those kind of memories for me.
I also thought of, if you remember the great George Carlin stand-up routine comparing baseball to football. I said, baseball's played in a park. Football's played on the gridiron in a stadium. In baseball, the players wear a cap. In football, they strap on a helmet. If a baseball game is tied, you play extra innings. If a football game is tied, you have sudden death. And he goes on with those comparisons. Because you might say, well, couldn't someone have this kind of attachment to football, baseball, or hockey? Certainly, I have a lot of Canadian cousins. Hockey is a transcendent passion there. But as as Sexton observes, this experience of being off the clock, of being in a separate, dedicated, sacred space, of being outside of time, and ultimately, through the passion of fandom, being pulled outside of yourself. It's an experience that really does separate one from the day-to-day concerns of work and life.
That's right.
Mike, I had a question.
Yeah.
I actually asked you this previously, but I thought maybe it'd be valuable for the listeners of your audience today. How do you take a baseball book? It's not a baseball book, rather, but it has a number of events and things, and the Red Sox, the Cubs, Yankees, etc., like that. How do you take events like that and do a documentary, turning the spiritual side of it into a deal? I just didn't quite figure out how you were going to produce that, or how you're going to actually have that story unfold. And maybe that would be a good explanation to how you could do that.
Sure. With any documentary, you start with a period of research, and then you look through archival photographs, archival film. We're doing this in association with Major League Baseball, so we will have access to their complete archives. So it's a movie, it's not a podcast. You want it to be visual. You want elements that move. You also are going to have a series of interviews. If you think about Ken Burns' famous Civil War documentary, he had Shelby Foote, who was primarily known as a novelist, but had written some Civil War history books. And he kind of became the star and your guide, if you will, through that documentary. David McCullough was the narrator, but Shelby Foote, who had been interviewed extensively on camera, kind of became another voice of narration and presentation for the film. So you gather those interviews. We're thinking of talking to people like Vin Scully, George Will, various baseball players and other observers and religious figures. And you take these themes that Sexton organizes the book around. Instead of being organized into chapters, he calls them innings. And it's those themes that I touched on in the talk: sacred space and sacred time, faith and doubt, conversion, miracles, blessings and curses, saints and sinners, a lot of cheating in the history of baseball. The steroids scandal, certainly one of them. The recent Houston Astros trash can scandal would be another. Going back further in time, the use of the spitball and other illegal maneuvers. Like in any human endeavor, a lot of sin. And then that experience of community and then the mythical aspects of baseball and memory and in relationship to family and community. So it's not going to be a chronological presentation or a historical presentation or focusing on one personality. It's going to be a look at these themes. And the film will go where those interviews and the search for archival footage leads us. What stories become the most compelling and the most illustrative. This story that came up in the LA Times recently about Barry Rose and the hostage would be another example of that connection of fandom and faith that the film can present and explore. So the short answer, Tom, is you find it in the editing room once you've gathered all your material together.
I guess so. I remember when I was a child, of course, we had no Major League Baseball. We had the LA Angels and the Hollywood Stars out here, Gilmore Field, etc. I went
That's
to a couple
right.
of, pardon?
My first baseball game was at Gilmore Field.
Yeah.
Where CBS is now.
And my dad used to take me there now and then. And but I can remember the summer afternoons lying on the floor listening to the replays by Jim Healy of Major League Baseball. The Boston Red Sox became my most favorite team. And of course, Ted Williams, my favorite player. And finally, when the Dodgers moved here, they played the first year in the Coliseum. And I can remember going to a game, the All-Star game in the Coliseum, and coming out of the dugout. By this time, Williams was a tired person, almost. He had played, but he was voted to the All-Star team kind of as an honor. And he came out of the dugout to pinch hit. And I had shivers up my spine watching. I finally got to see Ted Williams in person. It was an unbelievable experience.
There's a wonderful, wonderful essay by the great novelist John Updike about attending Ted Williams' last game in Fenway Park. And of course, Ted Williams hit a home run in his final big league at bat. And Fenway Park goes crazy. The fans are standing and cheering. The other players in the other team are standing and cheering. The umpires are beckoning Williams to come out for a curtain call. He doesn't come out. And he doesn't come out. In fact, he never comes out. And Updike describes that moment with one line. He said, "Gods do not answer letters." There's a way that those mythic heroes of youth, the Duke Snyders, the Ted Williams, the Willie Mays, become those larger than life figures. And that, of course, figures into the scenario of Field of Dreams as well, when Shoeless Joe Jackson and the other dead ball players come back to life in the baseball field and the cornfield.
Yeah.
So speaking of Ted Williams, speaking of Joe DiMaggio, I remember going to Yankee Stadium in 1946 and watching Joe DiMaggio hit a home run. That was very exciting. John, do you remember the Knothole Gang in Happy Felton?
The Knothole Gang of who?
The Knothole Gang in Happy Felton, that was before the Dodger games? You may not.
I don't remember that, no.
Was that a radio show?
Anyway, speaking of Ted Williams, I remember a number of years ago when I was reading the New York Times, I saw an obituary in the New York Times of a baseball player. And the New York Times was rather selective with its obituaries. And I read the obituary when it was a former Red Sox player, and he wasn't one of the Red Sox stars. So the caption said, so-and-so Red Sox ball player dies. And I said, well, why on earth are they having an obituary about a secondary Red Sox baseball player in the New York Times? And I read on, and what happened was that he was the one who signed all of the autographed balls and gloves and bats that was supposed to be signed by Ted Williams. And he got to be able to forge Ted Williams' signature. So he signed Ted Williams' signature better than Ted Williams, because Ted Williams got to the point where he'd be in a dugout or in the locker room, and then another case of balls would come in and said, "Ted, could you please sign these?" And he said, "I don't want to sign them anymore. I have no interest." So he delegated it to another player. So this other player who had the obituary in the New York Times, claim to fame was that he signed most of the stuff that is attributable to Ted Williams. So there are a lot of autographed balls out there that were never signed by Ted Williams. It was a funny story, but that was Ted Williams.
Well, I'm glad I don't have any Ted Williams signed balls. They're not worth much, are they?
Well, I don't know.
Mike, I have a question.
Yes.
Yes, talking about community and going to the ball game with your father, and of course, when I was young, early 50s, baseball was the only sport, really, and that's all we played every day. But I read a lot of books. I was an avid reader, and our library had scores of books about baseball. And they weren't factual books. They're all novels, like The Kid Who Hit 1,000 and stuff like that. That was probably way after your time. But so I decided I'd like the Yankees. And my father and I only went to Comiskey Park and Wrigley Field. And of course, in Comiskey Park, the Sox were the deadly enemies of the Yankees in the 50s.
That's right.
They were always second. So I was rooting for the Yankee visitors, and my father was rooting for the other team. So that didn't feel much like community. That felt like a real war.
Yeah, that can be true. Sexton grew up in Brooklyn and was an avid Dodger fan, then of course felt betrayed when they moved to Los Angeles. And as he got older, his sons were Yankee fans. Now, it would have been unthinkable in his youth to have been a Yankee fan, but he found himself converting, having the conversion experience to being a Yankee fan through his sons and through that connection. When my older brother moved to Boston, he became a Celtic fan. And of course, I remember many nights he and I listening to Chick Hearn on the radio when the Lakers would come just so close to winning the championship to lose to the Celtics. It seemed like over and over again. But he quickly became a Celtics fan. And I was struck by, he's in Boston, he's building his life there. He wants to be part of that community. But certainly you can have those lines cross within a single family. And that does kind of put a bit of a dimmer on the mythopoetic glow of memory, if you will, when you and your father are rooting for different teams.
Yeah.
I do remember when the White Sox got to the World Series in 1959, though, and that was in the Coliseum.
Yeah, but that they played the final game in Comiskey Park, and I was at that game. The Dodgers won in 6 games.
Closed the game for the Dodgers.
I grew up on Long Island, so at the time, and I'm probably dating myself, but this is the 1940s and watching the game in the 50s, especially the 1940s, and you had 3 Major League Baseball teams: the Giants at Polo Grounds and Yankee Stadium with the Yankees, and Ebbets Field for the Dodgers. And most of my classmates were either Dodger fans or Yankee fans, and I remember distinctly the 1947 World Series between the Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Yankees. It went 7 games, and boy, was that touch and go. One of the things that I enjoyed doing those years, you didn't have free agency, and therefore what you had, and John would remember this, the Dodger players every year would come back. You generally had the same players. You had people like Jackie Robinson.
Right.
He didn't play for any other team, and the loyalty. And there was a constant consistency of the teams. And one of the big things in baseball was if you had a trade or something like that, or Sal Bagley or Andy Pafko or something coming from the Cubs to the Dodgers, that was big news, having a player from another team all of a sudden inserted in the lineup. But now things have changed. People are just out there and, jumping around because of free agency and the other thing, it was strange. I remember the salaries they paid. Branch Rickey, and they had Carl Furillo, the rifle in right field. They paid him, and he was one of the best players in baseball, $6,000 a year.
Yeah, players, major league athletes in all sports in those days usually had to have another job in the office.
Yeah, Carl Furillo was worked in construction during the winter in Brooklyn to make ends meet.
Yeah,
that's right.
And now I remember going to a party at the Greenbrier. Red Schoendienst from the St. Louis Cardinals spoke, and he was lamenting when he played and so forth. He couldn't believe the salaries that the baseball players are getting now. It's incredible, but how times changed.
Yeah.
The Cubs had a reason they didn't win for so long. They didn't have very many good players. You mentioned a guy named Andy Pafko. He was my favorite player. And I would venture if we did a poll on this call, no one's ever heard of him except you, probably, and me, Andy Pafko was the best player the Cubs had then.
Do you remember a guy, I think it was Tony Cuccinello, who won the batting championship in 1946, and his batting average was 306?
Yeah. I do remember that name.
And then growing up from doing World War II, you had teenagers and old men playing baseball because most of the players were drafted. And in fact, you had a guy for the St. Louis Browns who had one arm, Pete Gray. Pete Gray was a one-arm player. That's how desperate the Major League Baseball got in the 42, 43, and all the baseball players were then, enlisting into service in 1942. Of course, I think a lot of the baseball players played baseball, to keep the troops occupied and that sort of thing.
You'd be intrigued to know that in the book, the last chapter, John Sexton, is entitled Nostalgia.
Yeah. Yeah.
Apropos of this discussion.
That is going to be the first chapter I read.
You ought to read. The St. Louis Browns had a midget on their team. The guy was only about 4'5".
That was, I think it was Cleveland, and the owner of the Cleveland Indians decided to have some, whatever that guy's name, he was about 4'3" or something.
No, that was on the St. Louis Browns. That was Bill Veeck.
Bill Veeck, yeah.
Bill Veeck, yeah. The guy had a strike zone about 3 inches wide. Yeah, those were great times.
I think my favorite story was when Ted Williams was batting. He's the last player to bat 400 in the major leagues. And on the last day of the season, he was batting 399.9. And they said, do you want to sit out as a doubleheader on a Sunday in the last 2 games of the season? And the character, when he talked about a god in baseball, Ted Williams was considered that kind of a hitter, that he could have sat out the 2 games, but he didn't. He went and played both games. He went 6 for 8 and ended up batting 406 for the season.
I thought it was 408, but okay, I'll accept
406.
that. 406, okay.
That's amazing.
And then there was Johnny Vandermeer. Didn't he pitch 2 no-hitters back to back?
Yes,
Who
he
did?
did.
Johnny Vandermeer.
Andy Vandermeer. Oh God, yeah, there's a. You know, the Boston Braves had a good team, but they only had 2 good pitchers, Johnny Sane and Warren Spahn. And they used to say, "Spahn and Sane and pray for rain." They had nobody else who could pitch.
How would you like to be Ralph Kiner and growing up, and he played for the Pittsburgh Pirates?
Pirates, yeah.
And you know, he was one of the all-time home run hitters, but the
Yeah, that's right.
Pittsburgh Pirates were always in last place and never were successful. But interestingly, when you look at Ralph Kiner, he became a very successful broadcaster of baseball.
That's correct.
He
Yeah.
made much more money broadcasting baseball. He was very good at that.
Yeah.
We obviously have some real experts on with us, which is great. Does anybody have questions for Mike?
I have another one for Mike. Is Mike, have we lined up any interviews, for instance, like Vin Scully or something yet for that?
Not officially yet, no.
That'd be good though.
Because, you know, during the COVID period,
Yeah.
you couldn't really get in a room with somebody and shoot a quality interview. And yeah, you can do it on Zoom and all that, but if you want to make a film that people are going to pay money to see in some fashion or another, you want to do it with the best possible quality. So things are just starting to open up again, and we can start to schedule those.
Vin
Yeah.
Scully would be.
You know, in making a documentary film, you know, the first thing is usually the budget and how you're going to finance it. There's various ways of getting into that. A nonprofit like our company could look for donations. You look for investors. You have crowdfunding now, which can be a form of donations and is less regulated than actual investors would be. And you know, a documentary can be made for tens of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. I think Michael Moore's films have $1 million plus price tags. So, you know, the quality can be adjusted accordingly. A friend of mine made a documentary on his own nickel about the sportscaster Marty Glickman, who did New York Giants and New York Jet games and a lot of basketball back east, and was a member of the 1936 Olympic team. He was supposed to be in the relay race with Jesse Owens, but this was in Munich, and the Germans didn't like, the Nazis didn't like Owens winning a bunch of medals. And when they found out that Marty Glickman was Jewish, they worked with the head of the US Olympic Committee to get him benched and not to participate in the race. So the documentary covers that whole arc of Glickman from his athletic career to his broadcasting career. He invented a lot of terms like swish, to describe the ball going right through the net, not hitting the rim in basketball. And it was shown at the Santa Barbara Film Festival. It got a so-so review in the trade papers, but Martin Scorsese's manager saw the review, and he was a big Marty Glickman fan in his youth. They got a screening of the documentary for Martin Scorsese, who had an output deal with HBO, and the documentary ended up being on HBO, and it'll soon be on DVD through the Criterion label, which is a prestige label for DVDs of movies. So the path a documentary can travel is going to be different than the path of a scripted film. Scripted films are usually much more expensive to make. By and large, there are exceptions in the independent world. Moonlight, the Oscar winner a few years ago, was made for about $1 million. And like I said, some documentaries can be made for several $1 million, but generally speaking, it's not going to reach the stratosphere of the, the big comic book movies with the $250, $300 million budgets. And that means that you can be successful with less revenue. Those films that go into the multiplexes have to make back a lot of money in a hurry. The core audience for those films is 12 to 24 years old, kind of like the let's get out of the house and the dating age. Whereas older people are going to either get to the theater more slowly. They might go to an art house cinema if those indeed are going to be coming back. I noticed the ArcLight chain is shut down. Or you may be seeing it on a streaming service. There are a lot of different options now for documentary films that didn't used to be there. And the passion for true stories or nonfiction stories is certainly there in the audience. And we see that with the popularity of podcasts as well. And if you're a person who has to commute long distances, podcasts without commercials, can be a real friend in the car. So when you launch out with a documentary film, you're never quite sure where it's going because it's not a sequel usually. Unless you're Ken Burns, you don't necessarily have big corporate underwriters waiting to finance you. But we've discovered through the course of the pandemic, there are other ways to exhibit films now, like this meeting being held today virtually online. You can find communities of interest for a particular project. We're doing a documentary on military chaplains. Well, you have a lot of veterans groups. You have the American Legion and Veterans of Foreign Wars and other organizations. You can target specific groups to help a documentary film gain an audience. There's one movie that was made about the making of Steinway pianos, and it has been used over the last year as a fundraiser for symphony orchestras all over the country. They pay the filmmaker a fee. They have a virtual gathering like this. They show the film, or maybe they show half an hour of the film. And it's the story of how a Steinway movie piano is made. And that's what the movie's about. And they've connected online virtually to communities of interest that are helping the filmmaker, continue to make revenue on a picture that's actually been out for several years. So the shelf life of a picture, used to be you were in theaters, then a period of time went by and it showed up on television, pay television or free television, and so on down the food chain. The film's life of making back revenue can stretch on for years. And if you get toys and stuff like that out of it, is so much the better. But a documentary usually doesn't have that long a shelf life. A lot of them are about fairly timely topics. So this experience, like we're having here today with a particular group, tying particular groups to particular documentary films can be a process of extending that shelf life for that genre of movie.
Oh, that's interesting. Mike, thank you for being with us today. I thought that was fascinating. And I have to admit, I'm not a special baseball fan. I'm actually more of a football fan. But I felt like you gave me new insights into the game that will make me reconsider. And you've certainly engaged. You've certainly engaged a number of our members. That was fascinating. I'm looking forward to seeing the film. That will be fascinating. I'm sure. As a token of appreciation for your being with us today, we will be making a donation to the Westwood branch of the Los Angeles Public Library in your honor. And again, thank you. It was fascinating. And I know that we'll look forward to hearing how things are going for you and your projects.
Thank you very much. That library is like just 2 doors down from our office. So.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. And I want to thank our guest, our family member, Frank Smith, for joining us today, and David Moore, our special guests, Pavrita and David Stover for joining us. And I hope that everyone has a happy and safe week. And I want to especially send good wishes to Nevin's family. Nevin is about to become a grandmother, and I guess it's a day by day kind of event now. So it's very exciting, and we definitely want to hear your
Thank you.
So I'm
Thank you, guys.
So glad
Thank you.
could join us. So everybody have a great week. Wonderful to
Thank
see
you.
Thanks, Mike.
We will be meeting
See you
again
guys.
Thursday, June 10th at the same time.
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye, guys.